First up, we have Ishanee Chanda, a third-year international studies major who is being thrown out of college 1 year too early. She enjoys cliche romantic things like watching the stars, cuddling, and dismantling the patriarchy. Her post-graduation plans include a lot of nervous screaming, binge-watching Netflix, and eventually finding her way to law school. Ishanee has been published in the Huffington Post and has plans to infiltrate the field of international politics to make the world better, one piece of writing at a time. Put your hands together for Ishanee.
Howdy. So my name is Ishanee, as you now know. This is an excerpt from a piece called Agni, which is the Hindi word for fire. It is about a little girl who realizes her family is about to change, especially after her older brother gets married. The house never looked more colorful than the day that Bhaiya and Bhabhi were married. Hundreds of guests were milling about our front yard. They were dressed in their saris, salwars, lehengas, and kurtas, and I saw the intricate mehndi traced across the hands of the women. Baba was the CI, or Chief Inspector of the entire police division, so the fact that the eldest son of the most powerful man in town was getting married was kind of a big deal. When we were hand-delivering wedding invitations around the village, I teased Baba and said the guests were only coming because Bhaiya was my older brother, famous in only that regard. Baba chuckled and ruffled my hair with his heavy, wrinkled palm before swooping me up onto his shoulders without warning. You are what makes our family glitter, John. You are the life of this family. To have a daughter is to have grace. While they had a simple, traditional wedding, the means in which Bhaiya and Bhabhi got married were not traditional at all. They had known each other since before Bhaiya went off to study engineering in Delhi. Bhabhi's father was a teacher at the local school. She had not come from a family unworthy of our name, but it was still nowhere near as respectable as Baba's position on the police force. I met her one day when Bhaiya took me into town to buy school supplies for a class project. I was standing at the small shop, staring at colored pencils and glue sticks, when suddenly he told me he would be right back. I watched him run over to the other side of the street to a woman dressed in a beautiful lilac churidar, and she smiled at him when he went to kiss her cheek. She noticed me watching and laughed lightly, turning to my brother and whispering in his ear. He looked over at me and grinned, beckoning me to come over. "I've heard so much about you," she said, taking my hand in her own. It felt soft and warm against mine. "There isn't much to hear," I replied shyly, looking down at my feet. She laughed and reached into her pocket, offering a present, a chocolate flower from the mithaiwala down the street. "Either way, I think a pretty girl deserves a pretty flower, don't you?" Her smile was blinding, beautifully so. I looked at her, the grin etched deep onto my face, and I listened to my brother laugh loudly as he pulled me into his arms. Later that night, I told him to marry her. 6 months after he graduated, he asked our father permission for her hand in marriage. There was a lot of yelling. My mother sobbed when she learned of my brother's dreadful sin. He had fallen in love before marriage. Baba did his best to convince Bhaiya to wait, to let him and my mother find someone more worthy, but Bhaiya was determined. On the same day, both Baba and Bhaiya went over to Bhabhi's house to ask for her hand. The marriage date was set for 2 months later. The days after the wedding were filled with a palpable tension as Bhabhi tried her best to impress my mother. I was sitting in the living room one night, listening to my grandmother tell me stories from the Mahabharata. It is one of the most famous tales in Indian mythology, detailing the journey of Prince Ram and his brother Lakhan while they go to save Ram's wife Sita from the demon Ravan. I hoped that my future husband would be like Ram, fighting every obstacle in his path to protect me from harm. Suddenly, a loud crash came from the kitchen. I leapt to my feet, running towards the echo, only to see Bhabhi staring at the metal plate that had fallen to the floor. Chopped vegetables littered the tile, and I watched as she looked to my mother with fear. I closed my eyes as my mother began to shriek, an immediate reflex, and I felt my grandmother pulling me away. I opened my eyes to see Bhabhi cowering as Mother started swinging at her with a wooden spatula, My grandfather tried to get in between them. Sometimes I crept into Pabi's room and sat next to her on the bed when Paya was gone. She always stopped crying as soon as she saw me and smiled warmly, like the day that we first met. Her hands were rougher now, and I noticed the pain in her smile, but I never said anything. On some nights I laid next to her as she fell asleep. I thought about telling Baba, but my grandmother always gave me a stern look whenever I mentioned it. She said I should not meddle between a mother-in-law and her new daughter. I asked her if one day my husband's mother would hit me. Her body stiffened slightly, but she took a warm hand and caressed my face. "No," she said, "that will not happen. It will not happen because you will be a good bohu, and you will not bring your family shame." I looked at Bobby, who was wiping down the dining table. Her eyes were kind but tired. I wondered if she was what shame looked like. The anger in Mama's eyes had become permanent. The bruises had gotten worse again, and I avoided home when I could, but Bobby's screams seemed to follow me into my nightmares. It was constant, and at one point, I thought I saw burns on her fingertips. 3 months later, something felt different about the house when I came home from school. It was as if the cement walls were holding their breath, afraid to make even the smallest movement. Mama and Bobby were nowhere to be found. Instead, my nose picked up the slightest scent of something pungent, and I wrinkled it in confusion. In the kitchen, the stove burned fire without pots, with half-chopped vegetables covering the countertops. With nervous hands, I turned the stove off and listened for something. Anything. That was when I heard the screaming. I ran into the backyard to see a figure covered in flames. My mother threw the kerosene on top of it, yelling curses and insults into the fire, and leaving me frozen to the spot as Bobby writhed in unimaginable agony. The fire was burning through her skin, and I was entranced by the embers settling into her flesh. Suddenly, she met my eyes and screamed out my name. Adrenaline kicked into gear, and I sprinted inside to grab the washing bucket. The water sloshed as I ran back towards her, and my mother watched me with scared eyes as I tried to put out the fire. It didn't die as the waves of liquid doused her skin, but the scream sounded relieved, so I did it again. My grandfather ran out with a large blanket and covered Bobby, hitting the flames away with such ferocity that she fell to her knees, whimpering. It took 10 minutes to put the fire out. Bobby had become a mess of burnt skin and bone, covered with ashes. My grandmother had called the ambulance. They came screeching in as I laid next to Bobby, crying as she withered away. Thank you.